Hey guys, welcome back to Vertical Momentum. I'm your host, Richard Kaufman, also known as the Comeback Coach. Guys, this is the only 4-time repeating guest ever on the Vertical Momentum podcast, even when it was Success Your Why, Powers Your How. My sister Tammi is somebody that I consider more of a sister than a friend. We've been friends for many years now. If it wasn't for Mick DC, we wouldn't be amigos like we are today. She is a United States Navy veteran. She's also a podcast host of the Hoarding Solution. And today we're going to be talking about all things self-care, because we've both been through trying to take care of somebody else, meanwhile neglecting ourselves. But before we even get started, I want to thank our sponsors, Andrea Kolank of E&A's Friendly Service. If you're in New Jersey, if you need your car worked on, she's the only person I would trust to have my car worked on, because they do it right the first time. And also, if you are a veteran, you need to join the Vetpreneur Tribe. I've been there since we've had 500 members. And if you really want to get serious, you might want to join the Warrior Council, where we actually have a mastermind for veteran entrepreneurs. So definitely check that out. So Tammi, my sister, welcome to the show. Before we even get started, my first question is going to be, because I'm so excited, I know I'm going to forget. What is your definition of resiliency?
I believe it has a lot to do with getting up over and over again, no matter how many times you fall in the dirt, stub your toe, miss a deadline. Like, it has a lot to do with showing up continually. Um, there's a quote around that that you are basically not defined by your failures, but you're defined by your ability to get up again. And I feel like that is a daily struggle for many of us. That willingness to get up every single day and try again.
Like Rocky said, whatever Rocky says, you get knocked down 7 times, you get up 8. So I love that. Now, you've been on the show, like I said, this is your 4th time on. So we're really not going to go into the past, but just give us a quick down and dirty about who you are and how did you get to the point where you're at right now.
So I'm Tammi. I'm honored to be here again with my brother Richard. I grew up in a hoarded environment in the 80s, so we didn't really call it anything except, it's a mess. Um, I was looking for a way to escape and enlisted in the Navy my senior year of high school. And for a long time, I never thought I'd talk about hoarding or my life experiences or any of that in a public way. But once I started to become involved with some of the veteran groups after my time in the military, I started to see that a lot of people came from a similar background or had a similar experience. And the military, whatever branch they chose, was an escape pod for them. And so over time, it kind of evolved into, hey, I'm going to help people clean their messes, to, hey, I'm going to really talk about what hoarding is and how it's impacted me, and what it's like dealing with parents that have this issue that are just mired in it but won't listen. So it kind of was an evolution to, hey, I'm really going to talk more about this and present at conferences and be on podcasts and things like that. Um, but it was a lot of shifting of the mindset that I'm not going to be ashamed of my history or my background. So that's kind of how it led me to Vetpreneur Tribe, and which led me to Mick DC, which also led me to people who believed in me and the idea that I should start a podcast. So um, it's been a group effort, we'll say, to get me to this point.
And I got to give a shout out to the Amigos. I got to give a shout out to Curry, Daniel Curry, Mark Dudek, Kurt Balish, Trish Lito. We were all at the diner there that night, and that's how we actually sketched out your podcast on a napkin, and you actually brought it to fruition. So if it wasn't for Mick DC, I don't think we would have the relationship that we have. And actually, the interview that I'm dropping tomorrow is with Stephen Eugene Kuhn. And so, and I actually met him for the first time in Mick DC. So I want to give a shout out. But let me just ask, because it's what's the difference between somebody that hoards, that has a hoarding problem, and somebody that just has a lot of shit? Because I got a lot of shit, but I don't know if I have a lot of shit or if I have hoarding problems. So how do you delineate the differences?
So I primarily look at one is your mindset, like all the stuff you have. If you were to lose it all, would you lose your mind? Or would you say it's just stuff and I can replace it, or it wasn't that important in the first place? The second thing is, can you use your home in the way it's intended? So can you take a shower in your shower? Can you cook in your kitchen? Are you able to have guests in your home comfortably? Do your kids avoid inviting friends over because of the condition of your home? And so, and I'm talking about things like your entire stovetop is covered with takeout containers that are empty, so you couldn't use your stove. Maybe your sink is full of dirty dishes constantly, and you wouldn't want anyone to clean them. Some people have situations where it's a clean situation, but it's just the whole room is stacked with boxes. So you couldn't use the bedroom if you wanted to because that entire room is full of things. And so the main part is if you're trying to depart from that and you're trying to get rid of your things, it's a matter of how are you handling that, and emotionally are you handling that. And a lot of times people with a hoarding issue don't see they have a problem. They don't understand why you would bring it up to them. And since they don't have a problem, they wouldn't allow help. A lot of times someone that just has stuff is like, yeah, I have stuff, but I still want my house to be clean. I still want people to come over, and they might even go so far as to hire someone to clean their home. I like to point out there's a difference between cleaning and organizing. I've had people say, well, they cleaned, but they didn't organize. Right, because you hired them to clean. You didn't hire them to sit down and go through your piles and help you figure out what you're going to keep and what you're not going to keep. That's a whole different situation versus someone moved your pile to dust your desk. So a lot has to do with that person and maybe their own trauma, their own things that they've gone through. Like, here's an example. I have books, right? It's pretty unlikely I'm getting rid of my books. Now, when I moved 3 years ago, I did audit all my things, right? And I got rid of some things that I just knew I didn't, basically, I didn't want to deal with them again. And that did include some books. But if someone came and told me that I was getting rid of all of my books, I would tell them to take a hike, because that's not happening. And a lot of people who hoard feel the same way about all their items, no matter the value of them. So they put as much value on a takeout container as they do a wedding photo. So that it's really difficult often for someone to differentiate between the value. And that is a huge key component of someone that has a hoarding issue, where they are not able to discard a napkin because Aunt Betty used it in 1952, and that's the last time they saw him alive, versus, hey, here's this wedding photo, or here's my military flag, or my dad's military flag. Like, that has value, that has sentimental value, and it's not something you'd want to pitch in the dumpster. But I've had these conversations.
Question, because I've had you on the show years and years ago, and I never realized that there was such thing as a closet hoarder until my father passed away Valentine's Day 3 years ago. I had to move my mother into a facility, and their house was spotless. Nothing was out of place. And then when Dad died and I had to go in, holy shit. I threw 32 bags of garbage out of the closets, out of under beds, out of in the drawers, because I never went in my parents' drawers, but 32 bags of garbage that was hidden, that a house that I thought was clean. So there are people out there that hide it really well, right?
There are people that hide it extremely well. It's actually not that uncommon to discover something like you're talking about, because there is just a mindset behind that. Whereas if this area is clean, they won't know that the rest of it's a disaster. And I actually have a great aunt that kind of operated that way. Like the living room, the parts that you could see as a guest were fine, but it's those closets and little tucked away spaces that had all kinds of stuff in it, including trash. And for older folks, there's something called Diogenes syndrome or squalor, where they just keep the trash. Like there is this component of people that do that, but it seems to be part of some sort of dementia symptoms a lot of times. And we don't always know that in the beginning. We just think someone's trying to piss us off because they won't listen to what we're saying about, hey, just take out the trash. And so it's very common for the kid to come into this situation and go, wow, there's more here going on than I realized. And then instead for you, like say you're getting ready to sell the house or whatever you're doing, now you got all this work you have to do before you can even get a real estate agent to look at it and make a reasonable assessment of what they could sell it for. So, I mean, some people would say, wow, you're fortunate that that's all you had to deal with was closets, right? But the thing is that the mindset with the people who stored all that is the exact same. It's theirs. They don't want you to touch it. You know, it's upsetting if they know. It's upsetting for you if you don't do something about it. So it's one of those things where it feels like you can't win no matter what action you take.
And, people say, well, you got the power of attorney. I'm the only child, and I did not want the power of attorney. My mother abused me my whole life. So now I'm taking care of the person that abused me. And the only reason, and people know me because I'm 100% real, the only reason I'm taking care of her is because my dad promised me that I'd take care of her before he died. That was his last wish. So that's why I do what I do. But for me, when you're power of attorney, well, now I got to sell the house. I have to get rid of the camper that she let go to shit. I have to get rid of her car, which she let go to shit. And then every penny from the household goes into her account. So I don't get any benefit of this. And I've taken 2.5 years out of my life, which I'm still doing. And it's a struggle when you're in that position. And there's millions of people like me and you that are like, I didn't sign up for this shit. And, and then we don't take care of our mental health. Like I'd go to my mother's for 3 weeks. I mean, I love Chick-fil-A, but when you're eating Chick-fil-A every day for 3 weeks, it's not exactly healthy. And then when you're staying in a house with all it has electricity and heat, but there's no internet. And so for 3 weeks, I'm by myself with no internet. You have to take care of yourself as a caregiver. And that's what this episode is about, is how do you take care of yourself as a caregiver? And tell us about your struggles, because we've gone back and forth over the last 3-4 years. We're going through the same shit pretty much. So talk about your struggle.
Well, pretty much we are going through the same BS. And I would say that your struggle has been different than mine because you had to sell a house and because you had to place her. And by the way, when people say, hey, I'm going to take care of my parent, placing them in a facility is on that continuum of care. It does not mean you have to do every single thing. It does not mean you have to wipe bottoms and prepare their meals. A lot of times, once you've placed your loved one in a facility where they're getting that 24/7 care, now you can go back to being the son or the brother or the husband or whatever role you were playing before you stepped into the caregiving side. I basically inherited the property where I grew up. I didn't really know that that was part of the deal. What I should say is I inherited a portion of it when my father passed. And then we were moving here and we had an agreement that we were going to clean up this place. We were putting it entirely in my name so we could place a home here. And at that time, we had had this discussion and agreement. We did the legal channel. We met with the attorney. We did all the things so that that would be a valid situation for everyone. But things change, right? Change, the only constant. And eventually, my mom, who still lives here, was very upset that we had been cleaning the property. And that in the beginning, that wasn't the case. She was helpful. She was doing the thing. She was helping us and agreeable to everything until it really got down to the point where, hey, that 30-year trash pile is going to the dump. End of story. No discussion. That's it. And what I have found is that often a person with a hoarding issue responds the same way, whether you tell them or not, that you're going to do this thing. And even if you talk about it and discuss it. But in that process, I learned about things like hospital delirium that older folks often get and don't come out of after a surgery. And the older you are, the more likely it is that that can happen. You come out, you're alive, but you're altered and you never quite come back to that state that you were in. And that led to a whole lot of other issues. And I'll just say, I'm grateful that I had responsive fire department, responsive EMS, that at that point, the medical doctor listened to what I had to say. I could go into more about that. And there's a whole lot of things that we could improve when dealing with our older folks. And for people like Richard and I, who are like, hello, we have this thing dumped in our lap. Now what? Who do you talk to? Who knows about it? What are your resources? I recently called the Alzheimer's organization and I was astounded that someone answered the phone, called me back, listened to my story and said, okay, here's some things that you could do. Thank you. That is a rare thing when you're dealing with these situations, unless you're dealing with an attorney, which now you're paying $300 an hour, which is fine and it's necessary. But what about what the attorney doesn't cover or doesn't know or hasn't been through? So how do you find...
Or what do you do if you can't afford an attorney because of the hoarding, the person doesn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of?
Right.
And then you have to try to move them into a Medicaid facility, which nobody tells you how to do, how to go about that. Most of the times it's pay to play. And in order to get my mother in a place, her place is $6,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
So, and like our friend Rob, I'm not going to mention the last name out of respect. Nobody tells you how to go deal with an 85, 90-year-old grandmother and try to get them the help that they needed. And that's why this show is so important, is because we're going to try to give you some information and teach you how to get to the system or get some resources, because you don't know what you don't know. And just by calling a place for mom, that shit ain't going to work.
Well, and that has a place, right? But what I've learned about that is that generally, in general, I can't speak to everything, is, hey, this person needs assisted living, so we're going to help find a place that gives them their own apartment, right? And someone kind of does overwatch over that person. But what I have found is that often that facility isn't prepared to provide the level of care that's often needed when a family finally says, hey, this person needs help doing showers or meals, or they have to use a walker. They're a big fall risk. I think part of the educational piece that we end up having to learn about is, what does a different facility look like? What does that mean? How are we going to pay for it? What resource is there when you're trying to improve their life, but that person won't listen to you and won't go. They won't even entertain the idea of a facility. And that's very frustrating for you, because how many hours did you spend researching it? How many hours did you spend on the phone? How many times did you have to get a hold of Medicaid?
Well, see, that was the thing, is I tried to, before my dad died, her money that she was making was just below the minimum so she can get into a Medicaid facility. As soon as my dad died and she got his Social Security, now she makes too much money to get in the facility for the care that she needs. And down south, $1,500 a month. That's what they consider too much income. So then how do you get somebody into, this is what I struggled with. Well, how do I get somebody into a facility that needs help, that she needs to go to, because the state just told me we can't release her to go home. So I'm like, wait a minute, she can't go home, but I don't have a place for her. And you don't hear a lot of stuff like that, but this happens every day to people.
Every single day. And a lot of times you don't know what to say to the hospital or wherever your loved one is. And even the term unsafe discharge, meaning they can't go back to their space without some kind of help. But it still happens. It happened last December or November for me. It was like, I sat down and had an entire conversation about, hey, this is what's happening. I was at the ER with with her for 13 hours. They were doing what they could, but their computer system went down, which slowed everything down. But I shared everything I knew, and still, after an observation stay, she was released and someone else brought her home. I didn't get a call. I didn't know she was being released. They had all my information. And so I feel like I've learned some things since then about how to handle that differently, because falls are bad for older people. And more than likely, as someone's mobility declines, they will have another fall. But when you've laid it all out there, and still they're like, oh, well, the person refused a home health assessment. Yeah, of course they did. They have a hoarding issue. So they don't want you in their space. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't have an assessment to determine fall risks and safety things. And if your mom can't go home, then what are you supposed to do? And honestly,
and that's what it was, because they let her stay for 30 days for I think they considered it rehab. But after the 30 days, they're like, well, you have to get out of here. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm in New Jersey. I'm driving back and forth. They're like, and not only that, but we're going to charge her $300 a day to stay here. So wait, you just told me she doesn't have enough money to go somewhere else, but you're going to charge her $300 a day until we find some place. And then they told me, well, you could just sign her over to the state and they could put her in a state facility. That's the options you give me.
Right.
But it happens. It's not a sob story, but it's happening to millions of people every day in the United States.
Every day and constantly. And I'm in some different online support groups, and I have to just say, thank God for online connections. I know there's a lot of kickback around social media, is this and that and everything else, but I'm telling you that that is often a lifeline for people going through things like this, whether it's personal connections like you and I have, or other groups, or just I'm in like a group for narcissistic, caring for narcissistic people. I'm in a group for someone that has dementia. And sometimes I think, or you're caregiving for someone with dementia. And I think, why am I in all these groups? But then something will happen. I'm like, oh, I relate to that story. Or that's a good way. That's how I learned about unsafe discharge. Like there's all these things that we don't know when we're going into these situations. And I'm going to circle back to Rob for a second. All of a sudden, even that situation was different because the caretaker was the person with the hoarding issue. The caretaker died, and now this elderly lady is all by herself stuck in this hoard. She can't physically do a darn thing about it. It's her living space, and she has been basically punished by being in this space, but yet she doesn't want to leave. She wants to age in place. Most of us do. How do you do that in a hoard if there's no running water, the floors are falling in, the rodents are running across the table? Like, how do you help someone age in place in that situation? Now, I'm not saying that situation didn't have that, but there were still layers of issues that all of a sudden you're now faced and you're dealing with it and you don't know. You're doing the best you can. And then you show up at a place that doesn't have your normal things, internet. And how do you manage that? It's hot. The AC doesn't work. You have nowhere to cook. You don't have a fridge that you be comfortable putting your food in. Like all of a sudden, your normal is all of a sudden not there anymore. And the most important thing you can do if you're in that, I think, is make a space for you. Make a room. I don't care if it's the bathroom. Like make a room that is useful and not chaotic so that you have somewhere to get some respite from whatever is going on.
And that's something that's something that Rob did, and he actually shared pictures with us.
Yes, he did. And it's important for you to figure out how you're going to manage you, because if you don't, it's not good. You do have thoughts of dirt naps, it's not good and if you feel isolated and alone, no one understands, you can't have we're going to tea today. No, you're not. You might want to pour tea on their head, but you're not going to tea today. It's very different dynamic, particularly if you've been abused or you're mistreated, and now you're in this caregiving role where you're like, I'm here because I feel like it's the right thing to do, but I don't necessarily enjoy this. It kind of sucks to be in a position of parenting your parent, basically.
And not only that, but if you're listening to this today, guys, you need to take care of yourself financially, okay? Because me and my wife, we talked to my mom and dad 15 years ago. You need to get life insurance. At the minimum, you need to get long care insurance if you can. Oh, God's going to take care of it. Well, now dad dies. I'm God, and I'm taking care of it the best way I know how. All because you didn't want to spend that extra $50, $100 a month. Now you're in a long care facility. You're in a memory care facility because you can't stay home because you didn't take care of your finances where you can have people come in and take care of you. So if you're listening to this, make sure that you're taking care of yourself and not relying on God, which I'm a believer, guys. I'm a believer. But when you say God's going to take care of it, that means you're putting the burden on somebody else to take care of it. You
And,
agree?
I agree. I'm a believer. I believe God is doing his thing. I'm glad. I don't want to be in charge of the universe. But all of a sudden, now you are in charge of someone else's universe and you have to navigate this thing. And do you wake up at 3 a.m. because you're worried? Check.
Yeah.
Did you put your own life on hold for some reason? Yes.
Yep.
Did you have to pay for something that you didn't plan on? Yes. Um, you know, uh, are you having these difficult conversations ad nauseum because the person won't listen to you? Yep. Like, and so where do you get a break? I used to say, if I can't sleep, nothing works. Nothing works for me if I cannot get sleep. And if you're anxious and worried, if you're not drinking enough water, if you aren't taking a walk, if you aren't doing anything, if you're not working out, if you aren't doing some of these self-care things, which it's so easy to get off track, you will fall. You will not be able to take care of those important people in your life. Not to mention, how much energy are you spending on this person? What about your wife? What about your kids? What about your nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, other responsibilities or connections that are important to you? And all of a sudden, all that's falling off the table too, because you're spending all this time, all your energy dealing with this other situation. And the
Then what do
guilt
you then what do
is
you do?
terrible.
Because like we're going to talk about narcissism, and this is not, like you said, this show is not about me, guys. I'm already over it. I'm done with it. I got one more thing I got to do, that I'm done. But talking about narcissistic parents, you know, one of the favorite quotes they like to say, well, I'm your mother or I'm your father, and sometimes you're just like, you chose to have me. You're the one that had sex. So how do I become the become the voice in this matter? So what do you say when somebody says, well, you're supposed to do this because I'm your mother or I'm your father?
Well, so I am learning that the word no doesn't go over well, even though I believe it's a full sentence and a boundary that you should definitely have in your toolbox. Um, I think that sometimes it's better to agree and say, yes, you're right. You are my mother. You're my father. However, that does not mean I should have to put up with this kind of verbal assault. That does not mean I have to listen to you disparage everything about me and my life and my choices. And so I'm going to say the church. I grew up in the church. I was very involved with the church. They have a lot of misconceptions also as to what a power of attorney means for someone in charge of their parents. We'll call it that. Um, I have often started referring to someone as my birth giver, which is accurate. You are, uh, I'm just going to be real, you are my mother, but that doesn't mean you're acting like I think a mom should. Um, I also look at, well, what mental health issues are going on, because that is a contributing factor to what someone is saying to you. Um, a lot of times people will say, well, it's the disease, whatever it is, whether it's dementia or memory loss or whatever it is. Yes, I agree to a point, but I still see glimpses of who that real person is. And if someone is narcissistic already and they start to have more health issues, that seems to highlight the fact that it's about them. And um, the, I don't know exactly how this fits, but there was a period of time when people would say, "Oh, I didn't know you had a daughter," to my mom, and I'm like, "What?" Like, she spent so much time talking about my younger brother who passed away many years ago that she didn't even bring up the fact that she had a living kid who has been successful in supporting her and doing things. At one point, I was her go-to person, right? She'd call me about everything. And now it's like, oh, I don't want to talk to you. Well, okay, but guess what? I still have these responsibilities that didn't go anywhere. So I still have to look out for your best interest. So it's very challenging when you have to correct someone. I have someone who will say, oh, how's your mama? You mean I use her name? How's she doing? She's doing fine. Like, I have really come to a season of detachment where I'm concerned. I do love you. I want to do what's best for you, but our interactions are making this extremely difficult. But that doesn't change the fact that I have to go make some of these decisions now, because clearly you're not capable of doing the best thing for your own interest. So I think you have to educate people on what you're dealing with. And that doesn't mean you got to give them every detail, but you can say, oh, how's your mom? She's doing fine. Like, you don't have to get into everything. Um, if your parent is calling you, you don't have to answer your phone every single time. You can let it go to voicemail and determine and listen to it when you're ready and determine if there's an action you need to take. And you don't have to feel guilt or shame or anything else. I understand that, but I'm just saying you don't have to guilt yourself into the fact that you're out having a nice family dinner. Your parent is in a facility and they have the resources to manage that person. They can get them to the ER if it's necessary. There's no reason you can't take 2 hours and be completely present and focused on your family. And you can have that conversation with the facility ahead of time. Hey, you call me if there's a problem. She's called me 97 times today, which is very common. So you kind of have to figure out, what are you willing to do and what are you not willing to do. And like, for me, a personal boundary is I will not clean a hoarded camper again. That's not happening. I went through enough verbal baloney the last time I did it with that person's agreement. So I will not do it again. Now, if she can hire someone, I'd hire someone to come do it. She can pay for it because it's not my crap. But I'm just saying that there's an expectation that your person's in the hospital. Oh, you're the kid. You should go home and clean out 32 bags of garbage. Why? I'm already stressed out. Why is it my responsibility to clean up their mess? And side note, you might be doing yourself a disservice if you do that, because now how are you going to prove to a home health agency, a hospital, a social worker that this was a disaster? But oh, you came in and cleaned it, so now it's not a disaster, so now they can come home. But they are going to be mad because you cleaned it. Generally, it's not going to be pretty. You're going to be accused of stealing and not knowing the difference between a used up rubber glove and a guitar. Like, and that's just not accurate. So you have to figure out, what are you willing to tolerate? What are you willing to do? Like, will I get you groceries? Yes. Will I drag you all over Timbuktu for 10 hours a day? No. Like, there is a limit to what you need to provide. And I really feel like, is that person safe, warm, comfortable? Are they cared for? Yes. You are fulfilling your perhaps self-imposed obligation to that person.
Well, I think the hardest part is a lot of people think, because they see the commercials, they're like, you know what? I'm going to call a place for mom or one of these places. They're going to come pick her up, and she's going to be sitting by the pool drinking Mai Tais and sitting at the pool with a guy named Frank. That's not the way it actually is.
No.
In order to get somebody into a facility, you got to jump through hoops. And especially if you have, because I never heard this talked about, but if you're trying to get somebody on Medicaid in a facility, they do a 5-year look back of everything that's been spent out of their accounts, and it takes. I know it's costing us, I think, $10,000 out of our checkbook to make sure so she can get on Social Security. So it's not a walk in the park. It's not you call place for mom, they come pick up mom, and then she's in a place, because it's for profit. And the average home, the average assisted living is between 4 and 10,000 a month. And then if you're need memory care, now you're bringing it up a couple $1,000 a month. if you didn't prepare, you're never going to know what you need to do in order to get a person in a facility until you have to get somebody in the facility. So, have you heard about stuff like this?
I have. I had a recent experience with a different family member that was being cared for, but the level of care became too much, which is very common. You have to know what that limit is. Um, was placed in memory care. Actually, I back that up. Was placed in assisted living based on the assessment that the people did to have her move there. She moved, she fell, she had another issue and ended up being removed from there and placed in a small, basically adult family home that only had 6 people, 6 beds. A, the cost was less. B, the care was better. I visited both locations at that time, and I my assessment now as I review that is the facility that first did the assessment was not equipped for that level of care. Assisted living is you basically have your own apartment. They check on you every couple of hours. You're somewhat independent still. If you are already in a wheelchair, using a walker, fall risk, can't make your own meals, I am finding that that is not the appropriate placement for someone. That you might have to go to memory care, you might have to look at nursing home care because of their level of need. And the most irritating part about that for me was the amount of money it took for the assessment, the deposit, all this jazz. A lot of it's not refundable. So you just paid out maybe 3-4 grand for this whole situation. It could be your loved one, they may have the money, but you're not getting that back. But they didn't assess properly. That's my assessment of that. And I know that happens to other people. And the person I'm talking about passed away a couple months ago. But again, at that point, the quality of life is 0. So it's not necessarily, it is sad, right? But what's sad is the person you knew is no longer there. Once they go, it's like, okay, now I know, at least in my belief system, they're at peace and they don't have to struggle to breathe anymore, basically. And that's another piece of things, right? There's hospice care, there's palliative care. And so you don't even know what the difference between that is when you start these conversations. And
Yeah.
you're dealing with grief, right? Like my dad passed away, your dad passed away, like you're dealing with the grief part of things, but that you can't just deal with that. Now you have to deal with all these other things, as far as the living and the selling and what do they qualify for, and each state has different requirements for Medicaid things. But something about the 5-year look back also, though, is there are exceptions to that. For example, if you can prove that you've been a caretaker for the past 2 to 3 years, something like that, I definitely recommend looking up and researching what those exceptions are, because even the people you talk to don't necessarily know what those exceptions are at those places. Even if you're applying for Medicaid or whatever state program you have, they don't necessarily understand all the intricacies of the rules of what qualifies, what doesn't. If you can put things in a trust, but even then it has to be a certain period of time before that person's in a long-term care facility, whatever they're in. So the
But
financial piece is huge.
but unfortunately, just because you get somebody in a facility, that doesn't mean that it's over. The game's done, because when somebody's in a facility now, I'm like, you know, I want to go see her a couple times a week, but because I've put my business on hold for 2.5 years, I got to play catch up, and it's kind of like I feel bad because I'm not going there, as much as I want to. but I also got to take care of my, I got to put food on the table. I have this business. So what do you say to people that are like, I just don't know what to do because I'm trying to make everybody happy, and the only person that's not happy is me. Not me, but I mean
But
in general.
and so many of us do that. We put things on hold. We don't take care of our own medical needs. We don't drink water. We don't take a shower. I know that's real rudimentary stuff, but it's very common to not take care of some of those things. Because I feel like a lot of times, especially if it's a parent, we've been taught that person is on a pedestal. We should respect, we should honor, we should take care of. And so we tend to go overboard with that. And we lose income, relationships, freedom. I could talk a whole lot about what it feels like to not be able to leave. Like my boyfriend and I, one of us is here all the time. And so we do get out once in a while, but it's not that often together anymore. And that's very different than how we used to live. So it's a piece I didn't know that we were going to be dealing with yet. I think you have to figure out, again, what that person's in a facility now, right? That means they should be managing their medication. They should be managing those appointments. A lot of times they aren't, and that's why we're still doing a lot of the things we do. And I think a lot of times we continue to volunteer for stuff because we think that's the way to show that we love that person. But I think sometimes the way to show love to yourself is to release some of that. Ask for help. Call the facility. If your person is calling you, 20 times a day, you don't need to answer that every single time. You could call the facility and say, hey, my mom's called and wants, ibuprofen, and she's called me 10 times. Could you maybe go see what's happening? You could set limits, like how many times, like say you want to go twice a week, but that's impossible. Like that's just not going to happen. So maybe you decide I'm going to go once a week, and I will show up at a time that allows me to leave easily. Like their lunch is at noon. So I show up at 11, I visit, I leave. They're going to lunch, I'm going, whatever. Or maybe you like your person enough that you want to have lunch with them at the facility. So you time it so that you can enjoy it, but leave. Like, don't say, I'm going to go and be here for 8 hours. I'll drive you nuts, But if, like, say you come out of town, right? And now you're there for a week and you need to do some certain things. Like maybe today's the day you deal with all the medical things. Tomorrow's the day you have lunch with mom. Maybe if you're in a position where you have to clean their apartment, you come and do that while they're eating lunch or whatever. Lunch seems to be a big selling point because a lot of people don't eat breakfast. Dinner's questionable, but a lot of people seem to go to lunch. And a lot of facilities prefer you to go to the dining room for your food. If you don't, they could charge you an extra $10 for serving it in the room, which just drives me bananas. Like, I want the person to eat. Like, who cares where they eat? But I understand you can't watch everyone if they're privately in their room. But you have to figure out what is going to work for you. What is going to work for your family? How much are you willing to devote to this? Especially if it's been narcissistic or abusive, or every time you go, they talk about they hate you and they don't want to see you. And why are you even here? And then it becomes, who are you? Like, you have to, it's very disheartening to have someone who you're doing your very best for be extremely verbally abusive. Some people get physically abusive, and it's okay to let it go to voicemail. It's okay to say, I'm going to call the facility tomorrow morning after I've had some sleep. If it's non-emergent, you can get out, take a walk, sit in nature, pet the cat, walk the dog, watch something funny on TV, read a book that you enjoy, have some tea, like go take a shower. I mean, I'd been so stressed out last fall when my person had a fall and everything else, that when they finally got in the hospital, I was like, oh, I'm going to go home and take a shower and freaking go to bed. And I don't care that it's 5 p.m. on a Saturday. Like, I know they're taken care of, and the hospital has my number, and I will deal with this in the morning. And nothing bad happened because I
But
chose to take care
let's
of them.
talk about facilities for a minute, because when a person gets on Medicaid, like mom should be coming up on Medicaid, I think, in like 3 months. Right now, she's still paying out of pocket because of the house and all that. But once you get on Medicaid, the Depends that you were once using, you're not getting them Depends anymore. The whatever soap detergents you were using, you're not getting any more of that, because that's what the state, you're going to use whatever the state tells you you're going to use. And according to in New Jersey, from your Social Security check, you get to keep $80 a month.
Yeah, it's like a really small
amount. And and they don't give you a phone. So you're pretty much, once you go on Medicaid, you're at the bottom of the bottom. So when people say, well, I'll go on Medicaid, well, you don't realize what it comes with when you do go on Medicaid. And I don't think a lot of people even know that, because it's not talked about.
I don't think a lot of people know. And I mean, I saw that. Well, these are the cheaper, adult Depends that we're sending. Well, they're very uncomfortable for this person. Yeah. Like they're always agitated wearing them. So we're going to switch them back to the other ones because we still have some left. But you're very dependent on what is the state or whatever program you're on going to provide, and you better just be happy about it. And I'd also like to mention that not all facilities are the same, and sometimes there are valid concerns about elder abuse and things that are going on there. And so you have to strike that balance between, hey, I'm checking, and hey, I need them to be somewhat independent so I can have my own life too. But you're right. A lot of people do not understand. I don't even know if I totally understand the differences between Medicaid and Medicare is a totally different animal. And you can have coverage through Medicare, but you have to have qualifying events that allow you to be in there.
Yep.
And if you're in rehab, you're supposed to be making improvements, right? You're supposed to participate in your exercises and walking and to make you stronger and whatever. And a lot of times people don't want to do that. They refuse to do what they need to do, and now they're not eligible anymore. And it just becomes this big money game. And it's really a disservice to some of these folks that are really in need and really need some kind of care. And then they're kind of stuck in this place where they can't really get what they need.
Yeah. And like I said, thank God for my sister, Angel, and her husband, Keith Reardon. Without them, Mom wouldn't be where she's at right now, because they're the one that actually found her in her chair, passed out. And for a couple hours, if she would have stayed there a couple more hours, she would have been dead. And they also bought her house. So without them, I give them all credit, but I also want to give a big shout out to Andy Nelson in the tribe, because when I had legal questions, I reached out and I'm like, Andy, I need help, bro. And he gave me the questions that I need, because you don't know. Well, how do I fast track sell a house? Nobody tells you that. No, there's no guidebook to say, okay, well, you got to do this, you got to do that. But a lot of people will say, well, you call a certain number and they tell you what to do. It's like, it doesn't work that way. You know what I mean?
It doesn't. And Andy was very helpful for me as well. And that's something I will say about a lot of the connections I've made in Vetpreneur Tribe is even to this day, if I have a specific thing, I know who those key people are that I would say, hey, could you either A, help me out, or point me in the direction of where I need to go, because I don't know. And I think as veterans, as adults, like, we want to pretend like we got it all figured out, and we don't need help because that's weakness, right? And I feel like getting to the point where you're able to ask for help is actually strength, And recognizing that you don't know everything and don't have all the answers is probably the starting point to solving the problem, whatever it is. So um, I I have had good connections and good referrals from the majority of the people that have helped me immensely with some of these things. So um, it's never too early to start making connections. It's never a bad idea to just say, "Hey, I'm sitting here doing nothing," which is rare that I'm doing nothing. But hey, I'm going to look up, facilities in my area. Hey, I'm going to look up an elder law attorney, or I'm going to reach out to someone who is talking about this thing. Um, which, by the way, um, there's a senior sales academy that is put on by, her name is Sarah Barker, but it's all about sales, but it has tons to do with your mindset. But I enrolled in her course, and tomorrow's the day, week 4 of that. But it's all about questions you need to be asking if you're hiring a home health agency, if you are looking for placement. Yes, it's about sales and it's about that, but I do work with hoarding situations, right? And people don't know how to fund it. They don't know, I can't believe I'm going to say this, about reverse mortgages. They don't know about ways that, veterans aid in, like, there's veteran support if someone is a veteran. And you don't necessarily know that. It could apply if someone is married to a veteran who served during wartime. So I'm just saying that I kind of had stepped out of the sales role because, like, I want to help people, right? But sales can be serving. And if you don't know how to do that, if you don't know some of these questions to ask, you're going to get the runaround. And even if you do know, you're going to get the runaround. But if you have a better idea of how to ask and what to ask, you're going to have less stress for you. It might still be a PITA, but you're going to have a little less stress if you start to poke around and get information. And if you call a place, you can talk competently about what you found.
And if you're in a tribe and you're going through any of this, another great asset is Joel Stewart.
Yes.
He's another great asset. I've been on his podcast. He's been on mine. So he's another great asset. But when I talk to Andy Nelson, I'm like, bro, help me. And he helped me out. No charge, because, he really helped me out. And I've had him on the show before, but something I never thought about. He's like, if your mom dies today, who's paying for their funeral home? Because her assets are going to be shut off the minute she dies. You don't think about stuff like that. So we actually had, because we have a spend down program that we have to use, but we actually had to prepay her funeral. Who would ever think of, normal people don't normally think of, well, my mom's going into a facility. If she dies, her money's getting shut off. Now who's going to pay for the funeral?
And the thing about that is, you're right. And you see those commercials. Oh, look, here's the bill, 11 grand. Oh, great. So that prepaid is a great way, especially if you're in a spend down, is to use some of those assets to do that. And I can say that my grandma died 2010, I believe, and we went to her funeral in the Midwest, and it was a prepaid thing. All you had to do was sign it and say, hey, here was 7 grand or whatever. We're signing this benefit to the funeral home. And that covered everything as far as casket and the service and like the whole thing. So there is a great argument for having that prepaid. And if the prices go up, you're still locked in at that price. If
you don't know what you don't know, because it's never really talked about. It's never thought about.
And death is kind of a taboo thing, right? In our country, like, oh, that's like it. We tend to think of it as a terrible event, and it is for the survivors often, but it's not necessarily a negative if you have been suffering for a long time physically, mentally, whatever. You know, I can honestly say that my dad got to the point, which he, by the way, he was pulled from the hoard, hospitalized, nursing home, died 3 years in the nursing home. But so I'd already been through this path before, and it's just, you don't know what you don't know. At that point, I wasn't necessarily as involved. He had Medicare, Medicaid, VA, like there's spousal exemption for the family residence. Like there are all these things that you don't know about, but if you don't ask those questions, you will never know how to preserve your assets or how to deal with some of these things. And another thing that a lot of people deal with is that judgment. Well, this is your mother. How could you put her there? How could you do that? Why would you do that? Why are you letting them live this way? Well, this is America. We can pretty much live how we want, and that's inherently part of the problem. If you see a situation that you try to intervene in, yet that person is still cognizant, they can still make their own decisions. They might be terrible decisions, but they're still able to make them for themselves. So it's a challenge when you're trying to navigate that as, hey, yeah, she's doing, 95% of these things right, yet she hasn't bathed in a year. So there's a problem here. There's disparity between what we can actually do, what needs to happen, and how we can actually execute it, because most people don't have 10 grand a month extra to pay for their loved one to go into a facility. The other part is you're giving all your assets up for this care that you probably didn't plan on. Like maybe you thought you were going to leave your house for your kids, and now you can't because you have to sell it to cover,
And if you're not living in a $5 million home, $10,000 a month is not going to get. It's not going to get you very far if you have to sell a house. But
exactly.
but now also I got to the point where people be like, well, you have your mother in a facility. I'm like, what's your address? I'm going to send you to her to live with you. And they're like, yeah, no, like no.
Exactly.
I'm like, well, that or the rent due is on the first. So if you want to send money, we take cash or check. And then they're like, yeah, no. So it's a very lonely thing. Even if you have family like brothers or sisters, it usually one person takes the lead and the other people kind of back. So it does get very lonely, right?
And it's hard being in that space where even the people around you that are supporting you maybe haven't gone through it, and they don't really know what to say or do either. And so it's a very lonely spot to be in. And so even though like I have a person in my life that's very supportive, when it comes right down to it, I'm the one that has to make the call on this. And you don't necessarily think that you're going to be that person, right? You didn't think that you were going to step into that role and have to make those decisions. And oftentimes we're parenting our parents. I mean, we really are. We step into that role where they used to not let us cross the street if it was dangerous, and now we have to do it. And they are strong-willed and independent, and they didn't get to be 80 years old without some kind of determination and resilience. So then you're butting heads, and often they used to listen to you maybe, but now they won't, even though your MO has never changed. You have always wanted to try to help that person. I look back, so here's hoarding for you, in a folder of stuff that I had, and it's like 14 years that I've been doing behind the scenes stuff. Hey, let's get out of this stupid timeshare. Don't sign another form about that. Hey, let's upgrade your phone so we don't have to do 57 minutes every 2 months to get you more minutes on your phone. And granted, we've evolved with phones, right, since we started that. But I just look back over all the time I've spent and energy and worry and concern. And it didn't start with, oh, this, the hoarding is bad. It started with things way before it got to that point. But like you said, and I'm going to just circle back to the self-care part, not only do you need to pour from a full cup, like your cup needs to be overflowing on that saucer so that you're pouring out of that saucer. One of my first coaches years ago used that analogy, that you've got to be so full that you are able to be there for the people that are matter in your life, including you, which is why water and workouts and journaling and whatever it is for you, meditation, connecting with something like Warrior Council, or I do some Reiki work with long distance, like for healing, for me to deal with my stuff. And I here's another example. I haven't really shared this publicly, but what the heck? I had a kidney stone back in July. It was terrible. I highly do not recommend that entire situation. But because of that, I implemented when I get up in the morning and I brush my teeth, because it's easy to skip that too. I'm just saying, I'm drinking my 20 ounces of water to start my day before I have coffee. Like, I implemented it. And a couple days ago, I'm wandering around with my cup in the morning, and my boyfriend looks at me. He's like, because it's kind of an off-colored cup, whatever. I said, look, this is my new rule. I will drink this in the morning. Now, yes, I have more I should drink throughout the day, and there's ways to get that in, but it's amazing how easy it is to skip that and end up with serious complications that take you out for 2 weeks. So it's so valuable to understand your boundaries, your limits, and what do you need to do for you. I mean, it's amazing to me how just little things can bring you so much joy when you've been missing them. I got to go to a young cousin's musical performance in the spring, and it was so great. Like, I got to be part of that and part of the family and see her evolution as someone that sings, and it was amazing to be part of that. And I don't have kids of my own for a variety of reasons, but that doesn't mean I don't get extreme joy out of other people and the work that they do. To raising a family is not for the faint of heart. Then throw in some hoarding and an elderly loved one, and oh goody, I can't wait to get up today. And it just becomes like this overwhelming thing if you don't find some ways to integrate self-care. Like, you will drive yourself crazy.
All right, now, since this is a teaching podcast, and I always ask this question, the way it sounds like, I'm not sure, possibly down the road, your mom might go into a facility. So what are 3 things that you're doing to prepare yourself for if and when that day does arrive?
So one thing is I have an attorney to represent my interests. I had my own documentation drawn up as far as a will and all that jazz, your power of attorney, advanced healthcare directives, all very important for you, like the life. And I have life insurance, like you mentioned, to protect myself in case something happened, to protect my loved ones in case something happens. So I have an attorney. I am attending a support group, like a once a month, for caregivers of people with dementia. And I'm also reaching out to resources that can help me. For one is like the Alzheimer's organization. I just learned, and it's a new thing that's only rolled out in some states, there's something called Ripple, which is about mental health and behavioral health. And it looks like kind of a wraparound service. So basically, it's an attorney knowing what my resources are and finding support. Online support groups are also very helpful for me because I can't leave the property all the time when I want to, which is very irritating, but necessary because, like, there was fire starting last spring, and like, I can't have that, right? It's not And when someone isn't aware of why they can't do what they're doing, that's problematic as the caregiver. And mentally, you said 3, but mentally I'm preparing for this idea that I may have to really push hard. I'm trying to have conversations and prevent that. But a lot of it is around your mindset and what's best for that person. It's not necessarily fun or enjoyable, but you end up in a position where you're having to make these decisions for someone because you care. You wouldn't do any of this if you didn't care. So when people give you any guff about your decisions or the fact that this is your loved one in a facility, like you said, do you want to write a check? Are you going to pay for that in-home health? Like, unless you have a solution or you've been through this, maybe that's a topic we shouldn't be addressing for your own peace of mind, and maybe to preserve the relationship with the person who's giving you this insight. you know, it's and pray. I guess I pray a lot. I had someone ask me, "Oh, how's your spiritual journey?" Well, God and I have a pretty ongoing conversation, pretty much on the daily. But sometimes it isn't, "Oh, thank you." Sometimes it's, "What are you doing?" And then I have to back off and say, "Okay, well, maybe you're going to show me what you're doing." Maybe I just saw something the other day. Scott Oldford talked about don't try so hard. And I was like, oh, huh. I always try hard, right? But then sometimes if you back off a little and just let things flow, it can go a little smoother. And that's something I've been just kind of working on. Maybe I can back off a little bit and use my energy to develop my podcast that has been on the back burner. Or maybe I need to go to dinner with my kid, or my wife, or do back off some of the hard things a little bit and maybe use that energy for something a little more uplifting and something that does drive your goals forward.
So that's my last question is the hoarding solution back 100%?
We are back in just not the same capacity as before. Prior to our lockdown, I did a lot of on-site work, and I don't do that now. Like, I'm dealing with my own project where that takes up a lot of my energy, but I do virtual consultations. I have a podcast, education, speaking. I'm creating a membership for people who are struggling but need a weekly place to come and say, "Hey, this is what's going on." So I am here. I am present in what I'm doing, and I am working on being more transparent. And I invite people to connect with me. I would love to talk to EMS and firefighters and police, our law enforcement and people who've gone through some of these things. Maybe what's worked, what challenges they've faced, other people who want to talk about it. Like, this is a hard conversation. This is a difficult journey that a lot of people are on. And it helps to know you aren't by yourself. Even if you're in New Jersey and I'm in Washington State, we still have that connection. We still have that desire to see each other succeed. And I think that's one of the most important pieces to me with technology is.
So then how do we get in touch with you? Obviously, I'm in your DMs every day, but for people that aren't, how do we get in touch with you? How do we support your mission? Where do we find your podcast, or if we need your help?
So I'm happy to say that thehoardingsolution.com is a newly created website, and that's where you can find all the information. You can email me there. I am on Instagram, X, TikTok, and Facebook. And so I'm present, and I'm happy to connect with people. And pretty much virtual can really help people. Even if you are at a distance, you can still have conversations. You could still do pictures. There's ways to support people um, across the nation, but around the world, you know.
I love it. And guys, like I said, if you're in New Jersey, you want to need your car fixed or truck or van, check out Andrea at ENA's Friendly Service. If you're a veteran and you want to become an entrepreneur, make sure you join the tribe where Tammi and I are very active. And if you really want to get serious and join a mastermind, make sure you join the Warrior Council. I think it's like $50 a month, but I've gotten 12x over what I spend just on hanging out with people like Andy Nelson and all the other guys and girls that are in the council. So Tam, I just want to say, I love you and I appreciate you. And like I always said, in private and in person, you're the sister I've always wanted. And I'm just so grateful for you. And I'm thankful for how you support me. You support my bride. You support my daughter. So I just want to say thank you for your friendship all these years.
Well, thank you. I consider you my brother, and I love and appreciate you too. And like you said in the beginning, without Mick DC, I don't know where it would have gone. I don't know how things would have gone, and that did change the trajectory for a lot of things for me. So I'm honored to be here and part of your journey as well.
And guys, remember, I'm a big Joel Osteen guy. He always says that every morning we wake up, we have a choice. We can either be a victor or a victim. And if you listen to this show, you're no longer a victim of your past, but a victor of your future. So thank you guys for always showing up, and I love you guys. Tammi, thank you so much. Have an amazing week, and keep doing the great things you do.
Thank you. You as well.
And guys, remember, vertical momentum, the only way to go is up. I love you guys. Have an amazing week.